Broadcasting live from Shady Side, this is The Monstrous Feminine, the podcast where horrible humans talk about horror. My name is Tyia, and I'm joined by my witches,
Mila,
Louisa,
and Zeba.
And this episode's theme is summer horror. We are going to be talking about the new Netflix trilogy Fear Street, directed by Lee Yaniak. So if you haven't already seen this new release, please go watch it because we're going to be giving away a lot of spoilers. But before we get into it, go ahead and follow us on Spotify, YouTube, or the Apple Podcast app. You can find all of our links on our Instagram at The Monstrous Feminine Podcast.
The Fear Street Trilogy has been adapted from books by R.L. Stine. Each film is a slasher and takes place in a notorious town called Shadyside, where every few years, ordinary people mysteriously turn into serial killers. As local legend has it, these incidents are believed to be caused by the spirit of Sarah Fear, who cursed the town back in 1666 when she was hanged for witchcraft. The continuous violence generates great tension between the less fortunate Shadysiders and the comparatively privileged inhabitants of the town over, Sunnyvale. The core storyline centers on a group of teenagers led by Dina, who is on a mission to save her recent ex-girlfriend, Sam, from suffering a similar fate of the cursed Shadysiders before her. Enjoy!
Since this episode is all about summer horror, have you guys ever been to summer camp?
I went to summer camp every year because nobody wanted to watch me during the summer. So I would go to like week-long like sleepaway camp. I never went for the whole summer, but I went for like many weeks out of the summer, like separate weeks. And that's super scary. And watching this movie made me realize, I was watching the second movie and I was like, where are all the adults? Like, why is there like 2 adults at this camp, but it's mostly like teenagers in charge of other children? I was like, when I went to camp, there was adults. But now I'm starting to think that I was just small and that the adults were teenagers. And I thought they were grown-ups.
They were probably teenagers.
That was so dangerous.
That's alright.
Like, we were out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody... Oh, no.
You know how, like, no one trusts teenagers with anything, like, in America? I don't know why all of a sudden, except for driving, I don't know why they're, like, suddenly when it comes to camp, like, you know what? You're capable.
Take care of these minors.
Yeah, like, I'm sure you'll do a good job.
Then I was a counselor when I was in high school because I needed money. But it was very small children. I was like 15 to 16. And it was a sleepaway camp, so that was not safe.
Camp on its own, regardless of if there's a serial killer, is kind of horrific. Like, showering at camp is like you at your most vulnerable. Like, it makes sense why there's always slashers. Where are you gonna go? Where are you gonna run to? The lake? No.
You guys have a very different experience of, of camp. On my summer camp, they were just like, we challenge you to kiss as many... It wasn't even summer camp, it was school camp.
That's right. Did you say kiss?
Sorry.
Go to?
That was not the place to stop. Let me continue. We challenge you to kiss as many banana slugs as possible.
Ew.
I mean, we did stuff like that, too.
Apparently your lips were the only part that didn't, like, make them burn because of the salt. And I was in it to win it, so I kissed 18 of those suckers.
Did your camps have any ghost stories? Like, ghost stories associated with the camp, but also just, like, general spooky stories?
I don't remember. I don't think so. I'm sure we did have a night around the campfire, but they just made us do, like, theater. They didn't, like, tell us ghost stories. That in and of itself was a horror story.
Wait, do y'all have any ghost stories associated with, like, your hometowns?
Oh, I actually do. Because my hometown was one of the only towns that was not burned to the ground during the March of the Sea during the Civil War. So all of like the plantations and stuff are intact. And so there was like a girl in my town who would always have Halloween parties on her family's plantation home, which is very problematic. But everybody would always say like, I never went because I don't really go to people's plantation homes. But
I don't judge. I accept that choice.
You didn't need to explain.
Yeah, you did that too.
My childhood best friend went, and she was saying like at night, like the girls shutters and stuff on the cabins, the slave cabins, were like moving, and there was like all types of weird noises outside. And then my family growing up had like land that we owned, and it was like deep out in the country, but it was very close to all the plantations. And they would always do like on Halloween, because all of my relatives like lived on this lot of land where on the street or whatever, they would always like throw a Halloween party for everyone, and they would do this hayride. And every time my mom would say like don't go, because my mom grew up out there and she had tons of paranormal experiences, and the kids would come back like terrified and shaking, because there was like an old slave church that was there, and several graves and stuff in the woods as well. Like, you would sometimes like see shadows and stuff if you drove at night on certain nights and stuff. It was a very creepy area, and my grandma still lives out there, and she constantly has ghost nightmares and stuff. It's not my thing.
My. I mean, that's not like a fun paranormal interaction.
No, it's not fun, Louisa.
When the legacy is like that.
I'm from Georgia, so most of the paranormal stuff is not good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true in New Orleans, but I feel like they have ghost tourism.
Savannah's also super haunted as well, but ghost tours
Really?
are like not really my thing. Yeah, Savannah has like a ton
I
of
wonder
ghost
why
tours.
that is. I wonder why some places are more haunted than other places.
I think it just depends on like what legacy is there. Like, a lot of places were like burned to the ground during different periods of time, or were destroyed and rebuilt. But like the stuff that's like real old, like New Orleans and Savannah and stuff, that have pretty much been in the same condition for like hundreds of years. Also Charleston. Like in Charleston, you're supposed to like paint the ceilings of your porch blue to ward off the spirits.
I think there's like certain like land that also like traps spirits, or like even like paranormal stuff easier. Like I feel like New Orleans has something going on. Appalachia. I don't know about like parts outside of the US, but I'm sure there are many places where like there's like epicenters of activity, like not even just ghost activity, but like people have all sorts of like mythical creatures who they see out there, or like lots of magic is practiced out there, so it just sticks. I don't know. Wait, Louisa, you had a hometown one too.
Mine's like more of like a stupid local legend. It has no kind of depth. This was just like, there was an abandoned house, and apparently like it was a bit run down on the inside, and people like made up this local legend because the bath water was black, so they made up this legend that like this woman lived there, and she went crazy, and she drowned her baby, and she kept a diary. So if you go in the house at night, you can read the diary, and then she'll get ya. More hash slinging slasher. He gets ya.
Wait, what are your personal ghost stories?
I don't know why, because every time I tell my grandma, she's like, but no one's died in this house. But like it should be happening there. I was like, so when I moved like from America and I was younger, I don't know, I'd just be up in the middle of the night for no reason. And not like jet lag, I just mean like I was just thinking about the life that I had. So while I was like meditating on that, I'd hear so much shit, like just like footsteps behind, like once I was like getting a cup of tea, bringing it upstairs, and I heard footsteps like right behind me, looked around, nothing was there. I'd have like that like horrible, not even horrible, but you know, like sixth sense when you're like on a train and you look up and someone's staring at you and you knew that someone was looking at you. It'd be like that, but no one was there, and I'd be home alone. Then in the middle of the night, once I heard like old-timey music. I heard pots and pans.
What do you mean
I heard
old-timey music?
Like old-timey
Frank Sinatra's
music.
playing.
That's immediately where my mind went.
It was like I don't know, like 20. It sounded like jazzy, like 20s. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were trying to put you on, show you some good music.
It was Ryan Gosling from La La Land showing you some jazz. That's a true haunting.
God. But it was like really, really faint. And then it was like, mostly I could hear really loudly like pots and pans banging and like a low rumble of conversation. Like it sounded like there was like a huge party going on, but like I was listening through like 3 walls, but I knew it was downstairs, and I could hear things running up and down the stairs constantly.
Oh my gosh. That's like surround sound.
It wasn't like so loud. It was like,
Yeah.
it was just like, it was kind of like faint, and then the pots and pans were quite loud and the footsteps were quite loud. So I was just like, I was literally in bed like, well, what the fuck? I was like, I'm terrified. What is happening? And I knew there was no one home because like, yeah. And then, except for me, my grandma, my mom, who were sleeping. So I was going to go into my mom's room and be like, Mom, like, are you hearing this? Like, I think I'm going insane. So I opened up my bedroom door, and like as soon as I opened the door, like it all stopped, and it was like pin drop quiet, and I was like, sick. Guess I'll just go to bed then, because my mom works, and there's no way I can wake her up and be like, hey mom, I heard a noise, without her being pissed off with me. And then I thought I was just crazy, but then my friend Taylor came to stay, and she had jet lag, and she was like up in the middle of the night, and we were sleeping downstairs because it was Christmas, so the house was like full. And she was like, in the morning, I was like, how'd you sleep? She's like, I didn't really sleep, and this house is scary as fuck. I heard pots and pans, I heard music, I heard people, I heard people running up and down the stairs, and I was like, and I hadn't told her.
Damn, yeah.
It's chill that they were just having like a little party and not like anything scary.
I'm trying to think of why was somebody throwing a party and just didn't want to tell y'all? Like,
No, it wasn't like, because it was like oldie music. It wasn't like.
What if you guys actually had like a little mini family of like little like Secret Life of Arietti, like little tiny humans who like lived in the wall? Like, they'd be, like, trying to cook food at night and stuff. I used to think that my toys came to life at night because of Toy Story, and then I watched Toy Story and Chucky, like, very close together.
Very different experiences of live toys.
So it's like, if I'm mean to the toys, then they turn into Chucky. So, like, I would, every day when I would get, like, done playing with my dolls, I'd, like, brush their hair and, like, gently place them in, like, my doll organizing bins and, like, put it away. And my mom was like, why do you, like, put them down like they're in a casket or something? I was like, I don't want them to be angry. And I want them to be angry and kill me.
Goodness. And
I was like, in hindsight, that probably sounds very scary, but I think small children always say scary shit.
yeah.
I feel like small children are open more to the veil, because I feel like things just happen.
That's super true.
But then you get all those YouTubers who like go in there with their green camera being like, this is the hauntest place in America.
Why is it green?
Well, like, sorry, you know, night vision. Like, they'll be like, this is the hauntest place in America. We're gonna measure ghost electricity.
The Monstrous Feminine is on Apple Podcasts, so please leave us a 5-star review. If you do, you just might get a shout out on our next episode as our Witch of the Week. This episode, our Witch of the Week is Maggie from Costa Rica, and they said, wholesome podcast. Wow, okay. I love this podcast, 10 out of 10. This is my second time hearing every single episode. That is so nice that you would listen not once but twice, but wholesome. Are you listening carefully enough?
We wish you a hot girl summer. Or hot person summer.
Hot them summer.
Hot them summer.
And I hope that you have a great day, week, month, year. A lot better than everyone in the movies that we're going to discuss.
We are also on Patreon. For £1 a month, you can gain access to our Discord. For £3 a month, you can get to see what we cut from our episodes in our extended episode. And for £5 a month, you get all that plus a bonus episode. If you enjoy our podcast, please support us. Any contribution helps. Kiss, kiss. Fall in love.
XOXO.
XOXO. Gossip Girl.
Fear Street Part 1, 1994, occurs just after another Shadyside murder spree, this time in a mall, which reignites rumors of Sarah Fear. The story follows Dina, a young girl from a broken home who has recently parted from her girlfriend Sam after Sam moved to Sunnyvale. During a heated argument about Sam's new boyfriend, Sam accidentally stumbles upon the bones of Sarah Fear. A curse is enacted, and the murderous ghosts of previous Shadyside killers reincarnate to hunt her down. Dina, Sam, Dina's younger brother Josh, and Dina's two friends Simon and Kate work together to battle these evil forces while desperately searching for a way to lift the curse.
Look, some gal killed a bunch of people at the mall last night.
Holy shit. Another Shadyside tragedy. Fits the narrative, right?
Sarah Fear's back.
Christ, not you two.
There's no angry, dead witch. The only thing that made him go crazy is this town.
The dude was wearing a Halloween skull mask. How is that not fun?
Off the bat, I'd say that this is my second favorite of the three. I think it sets the tone for where the series is going really well. In this one, I feel like the gore is the most obvious and the most seen, because obviously in the second part there were children in the camp and they could not show children being murdered on camera, which I deeply appreciate, but also I think they should have just aged up the people at the camp. I think one thing I'm gonna, I guess, hop into immediately, because I think we've had a lot of other discussions about female directors and female film writers. I think that this is a great example of great female filmmaking. The way that the characters are very dynamic. I think she did a great woman-loving woman romance. I love that she made Kate be like a cheerleader, valedictorian, and a drug dealer, and also like very badass and fiery. I love that it wasn't just like one-dimensional, defiant female character. I really think she done a great job with that. And also just making sure that even though the people in the movie were not teenagers, they also didn't feel like they were cast as adults so that she could sexualize teenagers. Like, they were still very much written like teenagers. They dressed like them. They spoke like teenagers at the time period. So I am going to give her 100% credit for that. That was very well done. Other people should take notes.
You know, when we were talking about Suspiria, and we were talking about how it's very easy not to sexualize woman, like, and we talked about the locker room scene and how that was like a good example. I thought this was like a good example in that opening sequence of like the slasher, and I was like, this is how you would do a slasher if you weren't being overtly sexual, even though it's like, I think, consciously corny and very much like, I think, a nod to Scream, just with the mask and the fact that it's, I think it was just trying to emulate Drew Barrymore's iconic death as well. But yeah, I kind of thought like this is a great non-sexualized or not overtly sexualized sequence, so I appreciated that.
Also, all of these are, I believe they're meant to be rated R. She did say in an interview that she wanted them to be rated R because when she was 14 and 15, like, picking up the Fear Street books felt edgy to her, and so she wanted to make sure that she like embodied the edginess and the subversiveness of how the books felt, even though the plot was drastically changed.
Is she an Aquarius?
Actually, let me check. I think she wrote the list.
Can I back up? Did anybody read R.L. Stein as a young person?
I did. I used to read the Reader Beware.
Okay.
The Reader Beware, You Choose the Scare ones. I used to love those. And also just all his books in general. But that was like, oh my God, we have the same birthday. She is Aquarius.
Wow. That actually,
You're joking.
that tracks. I love that.
Astrology is real.
Astrology is real.
Yeah, she's born on February 1st. Sending you love, girl. Love you, Lee.
Oh my God. That's so funny.
I don't know if y'all have like watched the new iCarly or like any of these remakes of things where they're trying to make like the adult version of what you consumed as a kid. And I actually like, I don't like a pure reboot that's like meant for children because they're not going to have the nostalgia factor. So what's the point in making a reboot or like or even a book to movie adaptation of something that's meant for an age group that didn't consume it at the time that it was popular? But like things like this where it sort of like grows up with you, where it's like, Louisa, I see what you're saying about the intentional corniness, and I love that, but like the violence, at least in the first one, was quite violent. It was really gory. It was shocking. And I think that it was shocking because it was like contrasted with like this like corny dialogue or like the like 90s aesthetic. It, like, it sort of like lulls you into this thing of like, okay, it's gonna be like, oh, maybe somebody will get an axe to the head and like, oh, we'll have like a jump scare here and there. But I was like, oh my God, like I'm scared. Why am I like me? And I think it was just because it was like shockingly gory in the way that a slasher should be. And I was surprised because like here I am at my big age thinking that like slashers don't get to me anymore, that I'm like big and tough and that I can't be surprised by it. So in that way it felt like reading R.L. Stein books because I was genuinely scared when I read them as a kid. And so then I was like expecting, I'm like, okay, but like those books are for babies, so I'm big and I'm not a baby and I'm not gonna get scared by it. So I appreciated that the direction sort of like grew up with the reader if you like read them as a kid.
I was also super shocked because I felt like just the general style of it. I know I don't want to necessarily equate a female director's work with her husband's because I feel like it has its own kind of spin, but it had that kind of Stranger Things style of like the aesthetic and like the kind of core group of teenagers, which obviously and obviously Stranger Things is doing that because it was paying homage to like the earlier 80s 70s horrors that came before. But I think it was kind of like another kind of reworking of that, and then it goes in a completely different direction. And I felt like that nostalgia that it was like pulling on led me into such a false sense of security, to the point where we literally had Kate battling the monster, and she was like facing the meat grinder, and I was like, oh yeah, this is a good one. I see what you've done there. Nice touch. How is she gonna get out of this? Who's gonna save her? And then she full on gets murked. I was like shocked. I was shooken.
Yeah.
I was to my core, like, because I thought it was gonna be like It or something, where you have that core friendship group that doesn't die. Like, shit will happen, but like no one, at least the younger version of the children in It don't die. I was like, nothing's gonna happen. They'll be fine. And at this point, they've escaped death so many times, like so many like assaults they've like gotten out of, and then she just dies like that, and then I'm like, oh, is serious?
And the character building leads to like how shocking the death is. I'm like, I did not think that you made this person like so like lovable or so hateable or so whatever. Like, they gave them so much just to like really have everyone die.
That is what modern slashers are missing.
Yeah, I agree. I think modern slashers definitely lean into like not developing the characters so that you don't feel connected to the deaths. And I definitely think that is a drawback, because when you do connect with the characters, everything is so much more interesting. And that kind of brings me to like the point that I think Shady Side is so interesting to watch, because I feel like everyone there was pretty much like a person of color or someone from like a marginalized group or a broken home or something, versus like Sunnyvale is like all the white rich kids and everything. And I feel like it's an interesting thing that weaves into the story throughout all of the things. Take a shot every time I say interesting. When you see how they're using like a generational curse of the whole town as a way to talk about generational trauma from not having the privileges that someone else has. But I don't know, something I think about like them being sacrificed in like this curse when it was actually meant for Sam, and also Sam's ability to go between Shady Side and Sunnyvale as a white woman kind of feels like how white women can go in and out of like oppressive states and also be benefited by white privilege.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is jumping ahead to part 3, but with the whole town curse through the good family and their pact with the devil, I think, whereas we talked about in Black Christmas, the remake of Black Christmas, how that secret society, oogie boogie spooky metaphor for like the sort of white male chokehold on society, like it didn't work, and it like belittled the various structures that like surround it and are still held up to this day. But I did feel like these films, with the, like you mentioned, the generational curse of the town, like that, it just like landed really well. I think, Tyia, you mentioned that the director is married to, like ages ago in the group chat, you mentioned she was married to one of the creators of Stranger Things.
Also, side note, they're both Aquariuses as well. That's a lot of Aquarius energy.
I forgot watching this, that one, that it was a female director, and two, like the connection to Stranger Things. Actually, I might have been aware of the connection to Stranger Things.
Also the actors.
Yeah, and we talked about it in the group chat.
You can't avoid thinking about it when they have the same actors and the same aesthetic.
You're right. But I feel like these films then did make me consider like how far filmmakers should use nostalgia to ground their stories, and in what ways it works in times where it becomes like too much of a crutch. Part 1 is probably my favorite out of the 3. I was under the impression that they were going to get progressively better, and unfortunately it didn't happen for me. And like Louisa, you mentioned, I don't want to compare her to her husband in Stranger Things. I think it's an unfair comparison, but I think Stranger Things does a better job utilizing nostalgia. Part 3, where we then are not situated in the 80s or the 90s, we are in the 1600s without any nostalgia. I doubt anyone has nostalgia for that time period. Maybe there are people.
I love the 1600s.
It's cottagecore.
Cottagecore, exactly. I found that part unwatchable, and it wasn't just the terrible Irish accent. I could have forgiven that, but I found it so fucking boring. I was bored out of my mind. It kind of made me reevaluate the whole film series. However, I do like a lot of the core narrative and how it's threaded through, like with the generational curse and like the dichotomy between Shady Side and Sunnyvale. Like that's done really well. But there's some moments in these films where I'm like, I could close my eyes and block my ears for 10 minutes and I would not miss anything.
This movie was originally not meant for Netflix. I think it was under Fox, and Netflix wanted it. I read in an interview where she was talking about it, but it got tied up in that Disney Fox acquisition period where Disney purchased 21st Century Fox, and at that point they were still making the movie and going through the production process. So I kind of do feel like by the time they got to 1666, some of that it may have affected the aesthetic. I actually like 1666 the best because I think it really did seal off everything really well, tied up all the loose ends, and also kind of gave an Easter egg for a possible trilogy next year or later on, or another additional movie later in the year or something. But Disney took a lot of stuff out of that acquisition once that was greenlit, but Netflix apparently was like very enthusiastic about this from the beginning and really wanted it, and so when everything fell apart, they got it. So I imagine like with acquisition stuff and everything, even though she didn't disclose it, I imagine that there was probably like increases and decreases in budgets and all types of stuff like that also was going on behind the scenes. So I can see why like the time jump didn't quite land.
I was just going to say, I don't think we're unfair for comparing it, or you're unfair, Mila, for comparing it to Stranger Things, because I do feel like you can't be married to somebody and then also make something with a really similar aesthetic, at least in the first one and kind of the second one, and then the end of the last one. And you can't like cast like a few of the same actors without making a comparison. Like, I think it's great in its own right, and we should talk about it in its own right, but I don't think we'd be like so guilty for saying like you have to compare them if you're gonna make them so similar in that respect.
I disagree with you guys. I do think it's unfair to compare them, mainly because I feel like there are a lot of like director couples who do use similar actors, just because I'm like, once you work with someone, they're kind of like in your work circle. They probably meet your partner on set at some point, and so if you're acquainted with those actors, it is a high chance that you'll use them in your work whenever you make something. So I think we should actually leave out comparing her husband's work. And also, I don't think all of Stranger Things gets better as it goes either.
I've never seen Stranger Things. I mean, I have. I've seen a couple of episodes from the first season, and I thought it leaned way too heavily on the aesthetics. Like, I was just, it felt like gimmicky, the like 80s thing. So like, that's why I never continued with it, because it wasn't scary enough to keep me engaged. It didn't necessarily feel like an age group of characters that I felt like engaging with at like in my young adult life. Like I don't know. I just felt like because this one jumps time so drastically, like 70s is very, very different from 94. I appreciated the variety like a lot, and I think that like that is what broke me out of that like annoyance with like the gimmicky aspect of like, I'm doing a period piece. Like the last one felt like a period piece and like gimmicky, but like the other two, I don't know. I thought like it added to this, to like the aesthetic that you liked, Mila, from the first one, and I appreciated it in this one. And it made sense because like, yeah, that's when a lot of slashers were made. That's how those movies were. So it felt like it was with purpose as opposed to like a love letter to like a particular decade.
I like the gimmick. Gimmick is I like it. I like that 80s gimmick. That's what gets me. That's what I liked about Stranger Things. Is what I like about this.
The only thing where I don't like aesthetic being so heavily relied on is, I know people are going to get mad at me about this, is Euphoria. I feel like they heavily lean on aesthetic over plot. That is something I will stand behind, as style over substance.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with Euphoria. It leans way too heavily into it, and it's also like to no function because they're teenagers. Why are you like trying to romanticize their life to that end? I think me and Louisa are just big fans of Stranger Things, and that's why we're like, I love it, it's the best thing. But I agree with you both in that I think it's fair to compare them because they're essentially working within the exact same style. Like they are at some points identical, but also she is a filmmaker, a very good filmmaker in her own right. So that's how we should talk about her. So maybe like instead of comparing to Stranger Things, like another filmmaker I think of who's really great at doing nostalgia without it overpowering the storytelling is Richard Linklater with like Everybody Wants Some in the 80s. They're period pieces. I find that so funny using that for anything that's like not Jane Austen. They have a really strong sense of place, and they are sometimes gimmicky, like less so than Stranger Things, but they do like forefront a lot of the decades like most sort of stereotypical traits and like the music. But it's like the characters come first and the story comes first. And I feel like sometimes in this film, I was going to say these films, but for the first one, I don't think I had enough time to really care about the characters as much as I wanted to. There was too much time spent like on the violence, which actually like I think was handled really well. As a slasher, like, it was really cool, but I don't know if I cared very much for them.
I don't know if I cared about them as much as I thought they wouldn't die. Like, I think it was just, like, given a lot of information about them just for them to die.
I feel like I cared about them, but I also feel like, I don't know if you guys are going to agree, but, like, the romance aspect of it was, I think, well done in the way that it wasn't done from, like, a straight gaze, like, blue is the warmest color, where they had to have all the weird, unnecessary sex scenes. Usually, I feel like, especially in films or TV shows with any type of, like, queer romance, I feel like they really lean heavily on sex for some reason. Actually, we all know why. Even to like the point of like, I mean, I love Scum and like Degrassi and all that type of stuff and all those teen shows. I will watch them because I love a good dramatic teen show. But I do feel like they really lean on making queer romances centered around sex. I will say though, like, Kate and Sam's romance was kind of infuriating at times.
Kate and Sam. Dina and Sam.
My bad. Dina and Sam's romance was like infuriating at times, and I had to remind myself, like, this is how a teenager would act, and that kind of like took me back to that, like, remembering that they were just kids and making me actually have like more sympathy for the characters than I would if they were adults acting like this, because then I'd be like, get over it. And because they're teenagers, like, I completely understand. I remember when I had crushes on people in high school, or like when I had my first boyfriend, and I thought it was the end of the world when we broke up, and I felt like I had to cry, so I made an entire playlist of songs to cry to. Like, I understand.
Making yourself cry.
I didn't cry, and I was like, I'm supposed to cry and eat chocolate. That's what movies told me to do.
I used to do that too. But I think I realized I was just not crying because I didn't care because I was gay. I wanted to go back to the comparison thing because I don't mean it in like a malicious way. I was actually trying to say the opposite of that. I know how it come across of like, I think you should treat it in its own right, and I understand why it has similar elements, and I don't want us to talk about his husband, but at the same time, I don't think that there's, or her husband, I mean, but at the same time, I don't think that you're unfair for, like, noting that. And I think of it as more like how society would pit their work against each other, if that makes sense, like, which is better, and only talk about Stranger Things when reviewing it. Like, I imagine that if we first made a film together, the Mon Femme Productions, and then one of us went off to do a different thing, and another one of us went off to do a different thing, people might compare the two because we are in a collaboration or a collaborative partnership.
But was she a part of Stranger Things, though?
But their marriage is a collaboration.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, they're involved. So I wish, like, people would just view it as, like, yeah, they might have, like, similar things, but, like, we can look at them distinctly rather than I'm going to pit them against each other and debate which is better and which is worse. If you guys went on to make something or another podcast, I wouldn't be offended about the comparisons because I feel like if you work together or have a friendship or a public relationship or anything like that, it's like, it's going to happen. It's just annoying when people would be like, oh, she only did it because of him or she copied him or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Back to the point about lesbian representation, it was so fucking needlessly dramatic that it was so comical. And then I was just like, to be fair, I don't know how I would have acted because I guess I was dramatic as a teenager, like crushing over guys. But like I said, there was the queer element, so I don't know if I was actually going all the way. So I was like, would I have been this dramatic if I knew what I wanted at a young age in high school, like about a girl? But I don't know if it would be entirely, because I will say the one part I didn't like was like Kate and Simon. Like Kate, I'll talk about Kate. Kate literally sacrifices herself almost because she distracts the baddie, and then while Dina's holding Sam underwater, she hears Kate screaming, no, like obviously Kate's going down, and she like still attempts to drown her. I was like, and then after they die, she's relatively cavalier about the whole thing.
I mean, but Kate said that when they were in the school and she was like, we sending her outside to die. which honestly I would have done. Sorry. But when she was like, you're willing to let all of us die so you can save Sam, like that was very obvious that was the direction that Dina was willing to go into. But I don't know that I've ever liked someone enough that I would watch all my friends die to save them.
Well, that's what I mean. I was like, in that way, it was like a little bit
but
too
I feel
much.
like a straight couple would do that in a horror movie and nobody would think anything. I would be like, yeah, that's what always happens.
I guess. I'm not saying it's because of, I don't think it's because of the queerness, but I just thought it was a bit much.
In college, Lee actually studied comparative religion at NYU. Then she did a graduate school in Chicago, and she earned a PhD in modern Jewish literature. And seeing like the connection with like blood and religion and everything in this film with the curse, and then like taking it back to 1666 and seeing like the Puritan and that her own background in religion, I think makes it interesting that she was the person who directed this film that is so heavily about witches, because I feel like there's a lot of different things in context to religion that are considered bad, but witches is the one that I feel like people really lean into, villainizing and connecting with the devil even more so than other things that are used in horror. Even warlocks, I feel like they don't make like this emphasis on like they made a pact with the devil to be a warlock, and that's why like no one even suspected men in the village did it.
Warlocks, sorry.
But they don't have a different term. They just say everyone is a witch and all of them made a pact with the devil, which I think is very gendered and very sexist.
I mean, there was a time where the witch as a term was gender neutral. I think it was Wiccan. I might be wrong. It went through a period of being gender neutral, and then it was more, witch became more of like a female thing. I think around the 1600s or, no, 1300s, maybe more. There's a turn.
I wonder if there was an intentional choice for it to both be female characters that were like teenagers that enacted the curse with their blood. Especially like in Ziggy's case, because she seemed like she was just at like the age of getting a period.
That's what Creed says about, we've talked about it before, but Creed says that the onset of witch powers or whatever, in this case it's external, but it's still like the onset of spooky dooky, oogie, what is it? Oogie boogie spookiness, comes with like a period kind of scenario. And I guess in this sense, it's with Dina and Sam, it's more like the nosebleed thing that's representative of that.
I think she gets a nosebleed in 78 as well, but it's only female characters that we see like their blood drip onto something in the curse and
I think it's like definitely a gender thing there. Yeah, Creed also says stuff about slashers, and she says that they're representative of castration anxieties, and women are viewed as castrated, and therefore they're constantly associated with excessively open bleeding wombs, or the female victim might symbolize like a preemptive castration from the male perpetrator, like what she might do to him, so he's doing it to her.
Hearing this from you now is like re-solidifying what you were saying about like this movie not being so male gazy in the same way the shower scene was, because like you're listing all these things and I'm like, I don't see that. That doesn't seem like there is no final girl in the way that I'm expecting. The like, I don't know, the castration anxiety isn't so, like sometimes it's so apparent, or like the deaths are so sexual, or it's like the stabbing, or the like way that people die is so porn-y. And keep going through the list. Sorry to interrupt you, but like the more you go through it, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have even been able to tell you why it's not that way until like you're going through this thing and I'm like excluding things that normally fall under the like monstrous feminine slasher tropes.
It's more of something that I want to raise in the second film, so I'll wait, but like I definitely have some thoughts about that. But then I think you're kind of right, and also Creed also talks about specifically rather than male slashers, or she talks about the female castratrice, who's a like beautiful siren who lures men to their deaths, and this is like throughout history there's like that kind of myth. And I guess in this case, this was the one I kind of did see, just in the form of like Ruby Lane, that she like sings. Simon is constantly calling her hot, and she nearly kills him by like sitting on top of him. However, in contrast to Creed's motivation, there's not like a rape revenge type motivation for Ruby Lane. She's just like one of the possessed people. But I thought that was like one way. But again, it wasn't done in like a very crude, overtly sexualized way, in my opinion. Like I said, I think the consciousness of it, or the awareness of the genre that was going into making this, made it so it kind of sidestepped those for me. It was just more enjoyable.
One thing I really didn't like about this film was how they introduced Dina and Sam's relationship, and like deliberately misled the audience to think that it was a boy, like with the unisex name, and then the camera like looking for her in the crowd and settling on the guy that you, like, the viewer would then assume is who she's talking about. And you could like argue that it's trying to like challenge your assumptions about like who Dina's ex is or who she has feelings for, but it kind of gave off this sort of like surprise, she's gay. Like it kind of felt a little bit forced. They could have just been gay.
Mila, you're our resident hater this episode.
I'm gonna be honest, the entire time I knew that's the direction they were going in, simply because I feel like a lot of teen shows have definitely went with that approach of using like a gender neutral name, and then it's like, oh, it's a girl.
I just knew from the internet.
You cannot make queer content without everyone knowing beforehand. So I was like, I know it's a girl. I was like, quit playing, I know it's a chick. But yeah, I guess you're right. It was a little bit jazz hands, she's gay. But I didn't dislike it. I thought it was all right. It's a corny thing. It's a corny piece of content, but I kind of enjoyed it for it. I think that's what made me laugh. I don't think it took itself too seriously. I think their relationship was like deliberately over the top as well.
I feel like I didn't like Sam until the last movie.
That's because it was giving like, why are we sacrificing everything for a white girl throughout the whole thing?
Yeah.
Also an ex.
My favorite character of the entire franchise was her brother, and then my second favorite character was Kate. So when they killed Kate in the first movie, I was already fuming.
I love the brother.
And so I think that set the tone of me not liking Sam. I was like, just kill her possessed ass. Like, I don't care.
It began as a prank and ended in murder. Fantastic choice. I love this one.
It's trash. Lowbrow horror. It's for my stepdaughter.
That'll be $2.95. Thank you for shopping at B. Dalton's. And have a nice night.
Fear Street Part 2, 1978 begins with the shady side first survivor, C. Berman, who Dina and Josh contacted in Part 1. After meticulously following her routine, Berman leaves a window crack by accident, which allows Dina and Josh to enter her home. Although initially panicked, Berman eventually agrees to help the siblings, and she restrains Sam in her bathroom and begins to tell them the story of the Camp Nightwing massacre. The story centers around Cindy Berman, Ziggy, Nick Good, Tommy Slater, and how Ziggy's experience as an outsider of the camp and being bullied intersects with her sister Cindy's image of perfection. The story is a tragic tale of two sisters that sheds new light on the lore and how to save Sam.
Hello? It's not over.
You are our last chance. How do we end this?
You have to go back to 1978. The first day of camp.
Can we pick up on the final girl thing? Because I thought that was really interesting. And I feel like it's very much, like, when I was watching this movie, my first note that I made on my phone was big final girl vibes. Because, I mean, there is, like, this whole, like, misdirection where they, like, make you think that it's one sister, but it's actually other sister who's the modern-day 1994 survivor. So, I mean, I think there's that sort of consciousness there. I was reading up on Carol J. Clover's theories about the final girl trope that she discusses in Men, Women, and Chainsaws. According to Carol J. Clover, the main character is boyish or less feminine in a different way to her female counterparts. So I guess in this way we have Ziggy, who says a line like, I love Stephen King and spiders. And I was like, giving me off pick-me vibes.
Oh, is that supposed to be boyish? Okay.
I guess in the way that stupid things become gendered as boyish, but I don't know.
Yeah, I feel you.
The kind of victim hero, the fact that Ziggy is tormented and even killed, but eventually survives. Prudish or unattainable, which is not quite Ziggy, but her sister, who we originally think is the final girl. But then also, in comparison to the others, probably also because she seems younger, Ziggy's not, like, having sex. She just, like, kisses Nick Good. So she's compared to the other campers who are older and full on doing it. She's not, like that wild. Watchful to the point of paranoia and notices things that her friends ignore. Like, Ziggy realizes that something's up with Nurse Lane, and whereas her sister ignores it. So yeah, there was that kind of conception of the final girl. But then Creed in Monstrous Feminine responds to Clover's kind of assumption about, or set of characterization of the final girl, and argues that whereas Clover says that like the final girl is really masculinized, and that's kind of the only reason she survives, and hence slashers resolve castration anxiety by making her masculine, in quotes. Creed instead says that the final girl is presented as threatening precisely because she threatens the masculinity by arousing castration anxiety. And I'll just read Creed here. That just because she survives, she's not necessarily a pseudo-man, and that the avenging heroine of the slasher film is not the Freudian phallic woman whose image is designed to allay castration anxiety, but the deadly female castratrice, a female figure who exists in the discourse of myth and religion, whose image has been repressed in Freudian psychoanalytical theory, largely because it challenges Freud's view that man fears woman because she is castrated. So I think what she's getting at here is that she's not necessarily masculinized because she's made into a manly figure. She's saying that she's can retain her femininity in her own right, and she's a threatening force of castration anxiety. And I thought in that way, and of course Creed's whole thing is like changing the Freudian narrative to say like men don't fear women because they are castrated, they fear women because they castrate. But I thought in that way, Ziggy is kind of Clover's final girl in the sense that she kind of fulfills those traits, whereas Dina seems to be more Creed's final girl, because Dina upsets, by being like queer and everything, kind of upsets like the symbolic order or the symbolic placement of like men, if you're looking at it in a Freudian symbolic sense, like Creed does. So yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting.
I think they both are outside of the like final girl definitions and binary. So like the whore, virgin, whatever. Yeah. That was so apparent in the situation with her sister, and then like, you know, the girl who smokes weed and fucking fucks her boyfriend. Like that was so starkly put in my face that I almost like I was so focused on that binary that I wasn't really thinking about Ziggy at all, like as a part of that, or even considering her as a candidate for a final girl, because like especially for like a slasher and a teen horror and a camp movie, like I'm looking for all these like checklist of things, right? I'm looking for the horror, I'm looking for the virgin, I'm looking for like the man who's going to get possessed or like become power hungry. I'm looking for like the faceless killer. Like these are the things that my brain either consciously as a horror movie fan are looking for, or subconsciously expect for having watched so many slashers, especially like 70s and 80s era like slashers. Ziggy and Dina, going back to what we were saying about like this not fitting in so neatly with the tropes that we have become used to or look for, is that like I almost don't want to call her a final girl, because like it feels like it like cheapens the complexity of the character. Like just because in my brain I want for everybody to fit neatly into these archetypes, the fact that they don't is, I think, what is good and surprising about at least the first two movies.
I would almost say, rather than like thinking about like Ziggy or her sister as the final girl, Nick himself is kind of in a way like a final boy, since he's like the goody two-shoes boy, and
I'm intrigued.
He's like a goody two-shoes boy. We see him like going out of his way to save Ziggy. He just seems so nice. He saves her in the beginning when they're saying they're gonna burn her alive for being a witch, and we just are made to see him as like this good, perfect boy. He apparently is trying to save the campers and is out there like risking his life and being brave. So he, in a way, to me almost seems like a final boy until you figure out everything, although I pretty much guessed it earlier than the third movie. But until you figure out like that he is sinister, he's just paid in so much to be like the goody two-shoes boy who makes perfect grades and is from the perfect city, who's very virginal and is doing everything to help this outcast that you know he's gonna survive the entire time.
I did think like, again, I'm not offended by it because it's so conscious of it, and I thought like it deliberately uses things like the prudish thing. It like really hones in on that element of the final girl trope, the most like I think, maniacal one, and like uses that as a form of misdirection so that we don't think it's Ziggy. But then when I was thinking about it, I was like, but Ziggy actually does fulfill final girl tropes, but because they pick up the most like offensive ones, because Yanyak picks up the most like offensive or like overtly like overt trope and then shoves it in your face, I thought was such like a good way to massage your expectations of what a final girl is and then make it something else in a way that flies completely under the radar of the trope, but technically Ziggy does fit into it. But yeah, you're just not as like conscious of it, which I think that was just the female director touch.
Okay, if you're like stepping outside of the final girl trope, maybe the reason that one of the like mini plot twists was that Ziggy is the final girl in the end was just for shock factor, because Louisa, you just said that Ziggy does hold some characteristics of the final girl. So it's not wildly like unexpected that she turns out to be the person that survives. So then maybe it is really just for that like enjoyable plot twist that she turns out to be the final girl. Like, was it really having some kind of like in-depth commentary on the final girl?
I think it does, and this is why. I think Cindy is the personification of everything people tell people in low-income situations to do, which is like, keep your head down, stay out of trouble, don't do drugs, make all A's, get like the perfect boyfriend, and live like this very perfection life, almost as if she was in Sunnyvale. She basically does all the same things as them, but obviously everyone still looks down on them because of where they're from. But she is the personification showing that pull yourself up by the bootstraps narrative is just simply untrue. And that like no matter what you do, if there is some sort of generational curse or trauma that is in your family, it can weigh you down even if you do every single thing right. So even though she was doing everything to get out of Shady Side, and she was like very convinced that this didn't even exist, and she was completely in denial about it, even though Ziggy and her had that huge blow up fight where she was like, Ziggy told her like, you're never going to get out because of the curse and we're all going to die here, like you're never going to leave. She still was very hopeful that like, if I just do the right stuff, then I'll be able to get out of here and I'll be able to go to a good school and I'll never have to come back. And that just simply wasn't the case. Ziggy wasn't meant to survive. She survived because Nick used his magic because he was infatuated with her to bring her back to life.
Ziggy should have died.
So you think that it's because of his infatuation with her rather than any sort of like, it's not an extension of the commentary on like Cindy's storyline in terms of like pulling herself out by the bootstraps.
When we see Cindy go back and meet Nurse Lane to like confront the trauma that they've both been through, I do think in a way that she does go back and start to heal the generational trauma that she went through and the trauma that they shared. Also, an interesting note about her, Christine Ziggy, is that the routine of trauma, like how it can manifest in like OCD behavior or obsessions to like stick to a routine so you don't have to have like a single moment to think about the trauma that you've been through. I thought that was a really interesting way to show that she was like very not in her, like in the space of like living her life and having a great time being alive. Like it was a very good way to show that she was highly affected by her trauma and was just passing the time essentially until she died.
That's interesting. I thought it was more paranoia, but I didn't think about it as like OCD to avoid confronting your thoughts.
The thing, they did not hit that hard enough for me. The things she had seen, all the children died. So much happened not on camera in the second one that if you like really sat with it, like she should not be functional. Like, she just shouldn't be. Like, somebody who's seen that, who's been through that, lives alone? It's ridiculous. It's wild. Like, she is the final girl, and that she's even alive today making frozen mac and cheese.
She has to be in these confines in order to exist, because like anything outside of that gives her a second to think about what she's been through. And so I thought that was a really interesting way. I mean, maybe it should have been a scene of her describing why she had those habits, because they did come in her house and see all the clocks and alarms and timers, and they honestly did not seem that intrigued. But I thought that was a better way than like how I feel like in horror movies they typically do like the survivor movies, like somewhere hunched up in a house, curved over, like speaking to themselves and like with dirty hair. Like I thought this was a much better way to show how trauma can vary in the way that people deal with it. And I also think that this movie did a good job of doing female friendship and sisterhood as complicated. Cindy and Alice were very different. It didn't feel like they were competing against each other, or like their tension with each other was anything to do with like a boy or this one being prettier or this one being smarter. It was truly like, I miss you and it sucks that you cut me out of your life.
I have a question about what people knew about the witch's curse. They built that toilet directly over her grave as if somebody had a blueprint. Like, somebody must have known.
Nick Good designed the town.
I guess they want access to it? Maybe.
Yeah, because they use those underground tunnels. We saw him go in the tunnels from the mall.
He goes down and writes the names.
Does he go through the toilet?
No, there's an entrance in his house, Mila.
I know, but why is there one through the toilet?
Why is there one in the toilet?
I mean, it wasn't like he could drop through the toilet, though. Like, that was a bit more complicated. Because it was like a hard fall. Like, you would be knocked out if you just jumped down from there.
The toilet felt like just for the sake of disrespect. And that's what really got to me.
I think he's just like bad vibes through and through. So
I feel like all slasher movies, not slasher movies, but like all camp slasher movies are at the same goddamn camp. Every single set, I'm like, I know this camp. I know exactly where the lake is. I know exactly where this turn in the woods is about to be. It cracks me up.
There's never like a hill. Like, where is the different terrain? It's all like the same. We forgot to talk about in the first movie how Dina she causes a car crash because she's jealous of her ex. Like, it was an accident because her nose was bleeding. She didn't mean to drop the thing and like make the car thing. But she was still like dumping like whatever the hell she was trying to dump out on them.
That was, if not murder, at least manslaughter. That was 100% manslaughter.
But like they get past it relatively like so quickly.
I think the adults definitely partake in it a bit because they feel like the people in Shady Side like write their own fate. And even though we do hear from like the Shady Side people that they believe that the witch exists, but for the Sunnyvale people, it feels like they kind of just say it in a mocking way. Like how they start saying that Ziggy was at the beginning of the second movie and we're like gonna burn her alive or whatever. We get the feeling that it's more of like a joke to them. And they actually just think the Shady Side people are just like these trashy people who turn into killers and stuff based on their circumstances rather than because there actually is a curse in the town. So I think it's more like everybody thinks this and it's been passed down since the originals, what happened in 1666, is that everyone who kind of like fell in the Sarah Fear side, pretty much just got associated with like bad stuff.
When they first set up the Shady Side Sunnyvale rivalry, I thought that they were going to go in the direction of the whole town of Sunnyvale made a pact, like whatever, centuries ago.
Big conspiracy.
To basically always ensure their success, their legacy over
That's
Shady
too complicated, though.
I'm sorry, what?
There's too many people involved. No.
It's like the Hannah Montana secret in the Hannah Montana movie.
You can't have that many people involved. It's got to be one family. There would be at least one person who, like, goes and tells.
No, because it all serves them. Because they're living in this perfect suburban paradise.
No.
No. It's a commentary on the media. It's commentary on media, taking a story of, like, the media take the story and report things as the cops tell it, and it's, like, skewing it and blaming the disenfranchised or impoverished side of town on their own antics. In the whole thing, we always see, like, flashes to news reports of, like, Shady Siders at it again.
Because if you think about it, it's the violence has never been perpetrated by anybody in Sunnydale. Just like there are hella serial killers in Shady Side, and everybody's like, well, that's what happened. Like, when poor communities always harm themselves, blah 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 blah. Like there was no incentive for them to suspect that their troubles were like at least for outsiders to suspect that like their troubles were because of Sunnydale. Like anybody looking at it from the outside in would have been like, oh yeah, just shitty stuff happens in that town because there's shitty people who live there who, I don't know, go crazy because they live in poverty or whatever.
I think it worked better that it was just the good family. One, I wonder if they took that name from like the Salem witch trials.
Okay, Good is Evil really sent me to another dimension. I was like, not a 3-movie setup for Good is Evil.
No. But, I think it worked better that it was like one family, because if you think about it, they pretty
Guys,
much
I just said
themselves...
I thought that's what it was happening, not that I think it's better. Please.
We're like, garbage opinion. Trash.
And never would have worked, Mila. Think about it.
Because it's one family and they put themselves in all the positions of power. Because like his cousin is like the mayor, he's the sheriff. They own like hella businesses in the town, and so it makes more sense that it's them because they're in every position of power, so they can pretty much frame the narrative however they want to make people think it is how it is, which it says is also very indicative of the current government.
Do we feel like this is an oogie boogie cop out for it to be one family?
No.
I don't.
That kind of covers a lot of different things that I think are problems in society, like nepotism, which is a huge thing. There are certain industries that are like extremely difficult, the film industry being one of them, to break into if you don't have family in it. And so this one family housing all of this power isn't hard to believe. Like,
yeah.
I think it would be harder to believe that everyone in the entire town would go along with it. No offense, Mila.
Yeah.
I disagree strongly.
They're willfully ignorant.
I think a lot of people don't like to think of themselves as active villains. This includes people who are actively racist, don't like to think of themselves as actively a villain. They're like, I'm not racist, I just think that XXX thing. Or I'm not a typical Trump supporter, I just think that XXX thing. And I think that is indicative of a lot of people in Sunnyvale. But I don't think they would enjoy actively being the villain. They like being passively the villain that's a part of a bigger system.
I was about to say, like, I think that the evil is in like passively accepting your own privilege and not like looking deeper into like why, like with no explicable reason, like why their town was so much more successful. Do not let me get into deep discourse, but
God.
I think that like this is
Go on.
this is like the perspective that a lot of folks in privilege take of like, if people are suffering, it's because of their own choices, and I don't need to think very deeply about what those choices are that led them to that point. Like, I think that's true of, like, folks with addiction, or folks in poverty, or folks who have, like, STIs. Looking at the system would be too difficult, so it's just, like, putting the blame on the individual, or putting the blame on, like, the place. And especially because they, in Sunnydale, cannot see what hand they possibly could have had in it. Just that these people hate them because they're doing better.
Right. It's definitely an excellent class metaphor.
Even like the way that the schools look, like the way that the football field is super nice, and they have better uniforms, and everyone has like the ribbons and bows at Sunnyvale when they go to the game, versus they kind of have like those beat up band uniforms. The bus is kind of raggedy. They don't have individual Gatorades. They all have that one big thing.
The individual Gatorades.
Luxury.
That's privilege.
Peak luxury.
So I think that in itself also is like a sort of a way of expressing that funding and support also affects the plight of how things turn out. And people don't consider that. Like, a lot of universities don't consider that when they want people to have 2,100 SAT scores and 55 extracurricular activities. Some schools don't even have extracurricular activities. I mean, it's a very biased system that always is going to benefit people who have more opportunities. If your school has horseback riding and fencing and badminton and 15 languages to learn, of course you're going to have a higher chance getting to college than a school where they don't even have a foreign language options, and the only thing is debate taught by a teacher who acts like Hilary Swank from that movie. Like, of course.
You're gonna hang, you witch.
For the witch's final breath, she found a way to cheat her death. By cutting off her wicked hand, she kept her grip upon her land. She reaches from beyond the grave to make good men her evil slaves. She'll steal your blood, she'll take your head, she'll follow you until you're dead.
String her up.
Stop it! Stop! Stop it! Stop it!
Fear Street Part 3, 1666, picks up for the 1978 scene of Dina reattaching the dismembered hand to the body of Sarah Fear. Dina is thrust back in time in a vision to 1666 in the body of the witch. From her experience, Dina learns the truth about the Shadyside curse and what happened to Sarah Fear. Dina and Josh inform Ziggy of the truth, and Josh enlists the help of Martin, a man he helped at the police station in Part 1, to help them end the curse once and for all, save Sam, and give Shadyside a chance at a better future.
Sarah!
The devil has come to feast on our misdeeds. And his darkness grows within each of us.
It's our fear. You know nothing good comes from those woods after sundown.
The sort of generational trauma thing really comes to light a lot in this last film in particular. I wish they had kind of divided it into two more. I feel like it should have been a part 3 and then a part 4 finale type thing, and like spent more time on the flashback, because it did seem kind of weird or suddenly leapt back into time. But I do like the fact that I think the whole thing works really well as a sort of metaphoric commentary on like the corrupt root of policing, if you're looking at it like that, just because of like, if we had started with 1666, obviously you wouldn't be introduced to Solomon, I think. Is his name Solomon? I can't remember. The original good is not a cop. But I guess because we're introduced to that whole family through Nick, who is a cop, I think the alignment is there from the get once you finish the series. And I thought it worked really well as a metaphor. I think the idea of like cop family being bad for generations back, or that family which has cops in it was bad for generations back, really ties into the sort of ancestral guilt that like white Americans have.
Do they have guilt?
You know how people say like how, oh, my father, like, yeah, my grandfather, whoever was in great grandfather is in the Confederate Army, or whoever, or my ancestors in the Confederate Army, but we're not racist anymore, and there's like no awareness of how they could still be problematic or still benefiting from what their forefathers did before them. Yeah, because Good actually is like a sheriff, and he's like playing the moral character, and the mayor as well.
The cop point, yes, absolutely, for sure. But I thought like this was like 100% a settler colonialism story. And like his, like while he was super evil and made a deal with the devil, everybody in that town was there for the same purpose of like having freedom, power, and land. Like when it came down to it, that is all that man's motivation was. And we're sitting here thinking about like how ridiculous it is that like you think it's worth it for people, dozens, hundreds of people to die regularly for you to maintain that legacy. But he's like, the part that struck me the most in this movie, and why it was like probably the one that like scared me the most, is when all the children die. Yeah. And you're like, fuck, that's your whole society. If y'all can't make more kids, that settlement is done. Everything that you worked for is done if you don't have like a second generation to pass this on to. And then I'm like, why am I feeling bad for colonizers right now? Like, yes, children are dead, and like that is like shocking to me and like unsettling. But like the thing that unsettled me is also my settler colonial impulse of like, what is life about if not passing something on? What is life about if not like creating generational wealth? And then I had to like sit with myself and really reckon with like, why am I thinking that way? That's so fucked up. And like his motivations were fucked up, but everybody's reactions, and in particularly the men's reactions to their children dying, is like, well, what was it all for? I did this so that fucking 300 years and down the line in the 90s that my kids live in a town that's better than the next town. It makes everything seem so silly, and it like trivializes like life and death situations, because you're not thinking about the life that was just lost. You're thinking about like the quality of life of the people who would have come after you. And I think like that is what fucked me up the most about the last one. It's because it's like sitting with like how icky that motivation was, not just for the Good family but for everybody involved. And I think that's why also the casting situation was weird, because like we've done a settler colonialism narrative completely devoid of race, or like colorblind cast this situation, which was like super jarring to see like just black people walking around. And I understand that it was not like real, like it was her like vision of what happened, or like her projection of what happened, or whatever directorial choice that was. But I was like, if this was not on purpose, I think we really need to actually like sit and think about like what this section of the trilogy has done.
I don't think it would be wrong to be like, to say it could necessarily be both, like starting with a cop family and seeing what structures are they still upholding, and then going back in time and being like, it's like a sort of settlist or land grab capitalist kind of narrative that's being upheld. But that's kind of why I liked how it started with a cop, because like taking a modern day debate that Americans have and then broadening it and showing the roots of the problem. I guess I hadn't really thought about like I was kind of thinking, like, it's weird that Sarah Fear, if you're going to make that sort of metaphor of, like, more policing, if you're making it about corrupt policing, like, do you think that the sort of corruption of police is more about a sort of patriarchal domination than it is race?
Well, police is about the protection of property. So these things are, like, very much intertwined, of private property. And so, like, private property exists because of settler colonialism. That's the only reason private property exists in America. And, like, the police serve to protect property originally being, like, slaves, and, like, police being slave catchers. But, like, modern day policing is to protect the property of a city or a neighborhood or, like, a piece of land. It's the exact same, like, purpose. And the way that, like, the good family are, like, cops and the mayor because they are protecting themselves.
Yeah.
They are the owners of the land. Like, they're protecting their own private property.
I don't know that, like, when I saw the kids murdered in the church, I thought about, like, the bloodline. I think I just honestly thought about how vicious it was for their eyes and stuff to be cut out. Like, that was a very jarring scene, especially because, like, in the second film, we didn't see any of, like, the murdered children's bodies. And so as an audience, I thought that we were definitely going to be shielded from dead children. I don't know if any of the actors were actually kids, because obviously, like, the guy who played her brother is like 19 in real life. And I think Sadie Sink is also like 18 or 19 years old, so I'm not sure if they're actually kids. I'm sure some of the people in there were, because I think there were smaller kids in them. I think using the same actors compromised the 1666 aspect of this story. It like takes the viewer out of it and makes it feel like we're watching like a play production of what happened, rather than like seeing the real horror and trauma of what happened during that time period. Like, that was a rough period in history. It felt like I was just watching a play of The Crucible.
It was very Crucible.
I was like, well, if we're gonna make like so many horror films about like black people going through racism, or black people in the 60s being terrorized by white neighbors, or a black woman from modern day being put in slavery, can we not have a realistic horror in 1666 with like white people? I thought that was odd. This isn't any slight to like the writer or director, because I don't think they meant it that way. I think they just thought it would like translate better to use the same actors, but I think it was actually a big mistake. Sorry. It just really took me out of it. The entire time I was watching it, I was literally calling Sarah's character Dina. I was like, why is the cop trying to date Dina? Like, it just wasn't a good choice.
Also, like, Dina was so racially ambiguous as well, like, just through all of it.
Yeah. I mean, her and her brother being related was enough of a stretch to me.
I was literally thinking that. I was like, do they have different
But
fathers?
I do believe that the actor and her both have Portuguese descent.
That aside, the witch, it's like Sarah, is white.
But it's a bit more complicated to put her as Dina when you have a white man like cutting off her hand and using her for power.
But also the visual effects where they would like flash between when it was like her, or like, you know, she looks enough like that white woman that it's like, okay, but you made an intentional enough casting choice that we can have this like visual trick of the eye. So it's like, I don't know. It felt like a weird use of that actress's body in that instance. Like, that she looks kind of like the other woman. But we're not acknowledging that she's, like, mixed or whatever.
I also made a point in my notes that said, I thought it was strange that Dina and Josh had to be the ones to break this curse that was, like, started by white people. It was like a white woman whose curse it was.
Straight up, if they are not the descendants of those people, it makes no fucking sense.
Sam is also like a white woman, and like we never see if Sam actually looks like the other girl who was involved with Sarah in the relationship. We never saw that. We just know how Sarah looks, and we know that Sarah was actually white. So I was like, why do we have two children who are, I believe, Afro-Brazilian, breaking a white curse? I don't really know.
This is what I think I was trying to say. Like, it's almost like if you were making a commentary on like the modern day structures, right? Like that harm people, like working class people, black people specifically, people of color more broadly in America. And then like if that's what the first film was doing, and then you go back in time to find the sort of root, or like when it was kind of starting, how this curse began, if you're looking at it as a metaphoric curse, in quotes. And it was kind of like almost using Dina to like make a link, or being like, this is what's harming black people or this community more broadly, shady side, like making that more explicit link. But I thought it was weird, and it kind of, I was like, are they doing that so it's not just like patriarchal, like a commentary, but also like a racist commentary.
I think
on, like,
it was
these
just
structures.
honestly a bad filmmaking choice. I do think she
Right.
made a lot of great choices with this trilogy. I really liked it. I think this was just a bad choice. I think they honestly just were like, what if we use the same actors in the past and present? The audience would love it. And it's like, no, it really takes you out of it. And like, it just looks like a high school production of like The Crucible with a twist. And I was like, I'm just not feeling it.
But it's fucked up when high schools do it too. Like you have to reckon with racialized bodies when you put them in a time period. You just have to. Like, I don't give a shit about what Hamilton did for y'all. You actually like can't just be like casting whoever the fuck. It's giving like early 2000s post-racial like if we don't think about it, we've overcome it. And it's like, but we're talking about the origins of this country. So like, let's be real.
But I don't want to necessarily say like I disagree with like racially blind casting. I don't agree with like white actors playing people of color, but I do think it's like a very limiting way with like actors who are people of color to only be able to portray like if you want to be a character in the 1800s or like the 1600s, you got to be the slave or something. I feel like that is very limiting.
Well, no, I think that's fine if your story is not like about race. I don't know. Like for this one, I don't think it was meant to be about race, so I understand why they thought it was okay. But like I picked up on so many like implications that just got like dropped or like fell through the cracks that I'm like, it just looks messy. Like unless it's tight, then I'm fine with the casting. Like whatever. I don't really care. But like it needs to be like, it can't be careless, I guess. Like I think there needs to be thought put into it if you're going to do colorblind casting.
Do you think it would have been more like made more sense if like Sarah Fear had originally been a black woman or like a black victim of the Salem witch trial?
Agree.
No, I just don't think it needed to be those siblings' job to break the curse.
I don't think it needed to be those siblings' job to break the curse. I don't feel like it benefited everyone, and like Dina can go to college now and they can all leave the town happily ever after, whatever. Her and Sam can go eat burgers on somebody's grave.
Please.
It just wasn't, it didn't land the way that like it was meant to. I think because we didn't get to see enough of them as a couple that I just didn't give a shit. I was like, you can go find a new girlfriend. If it was a heterosexual couple, I feel like that would have been torturous to watch, and the ratings for this would have been significantly lower.
That is like a true definition of queer bait, though, which is so sad. Like sad.
But like queer baiting is like in the end they're maybe not gay. This is just a good old rainbow capitalism.
I mean it literally as in like you are baiting the queers to come watch this thing.
They're defying a lot more odds. Like their love for each other seemed a lot more genuine just because she has to go against like her conservative shitty mom to be with Dina. Like it just seemed a lot more real. And if it was just like my parents hate you because you're poor and it was a heterosexual thing, it would have just been boring.
Yeah, it did make it more compelling.
In the 1666 part, I guess that's the only part where we get like a sex scene.
Oh right, yeah, they fuck. Forgot about that.
I was like, I don't know why y'all want to do it in the woods when everybody in the woods.
I know, that was silly. They went to the most bait place to do it out in the open.
In a clearing in the woods when everybody else was in the woods. But I do think the fact that like the guy associating with them with being witches because they were, I couldn't tell if he was saying they were witches because they were gay or because he was angry because he wanted to be with Sam.
I feel like it was a mixture of both.
Wait, can we talk about the witch hunt aspect for a second? Like it is like maybe perhaps very basic to like, I don't know, really unpack this on this like feminism podcast, but like it was just so I don't know. I know men's egos are fragile, but like the projection, the like fear of rejection, the insecurity, it was just like, and it wasn't just that guy. It was like once they decided there was a witch or they decided somebody, but either way, they knew somebody was being gay. Regardless of if there was a witch or not a witch or magic was happening or who was conducting it, there was like gayness afoot. And it's like all of these men, yes, all of these men had this reaction like they were all being rejected by these women. Like the fact that they were gay, or that they didn't want men at all of them were like, yeah, like they're wrong. They're like the devil, because they like, it seemed like they were all projecting this rejection that this one man was having, and it was like the most bizarre. And I imagine that's exactly how it happened. Like, I imagine that's how like the witch trials really went down, that it was like this mass psychosis of male ego. But like, it was just so wild to watch unfold, because I'm like, in every single instance, they are more focused on the fake danger than the real danger.
Yeah.
I agree.
That's it.
One of the things that I think this movie did really well, whether intentionally or unintentionally, but I am going to lean towards intentionally, is show how gendered the hatred towards witches and magic is. There are even like guys who you'll meet on like a dating app and they'll be like, no astrology hoes in their bio. And
I was like, what is it to you? Yeah, like, who am I hurting? Who am I hurting?
They're fucking witch hunting in 2021. I'm tired.
I've never seen a girl say like, I won't date a guy who likes astrology, or I won't date a guy who collects crystals or something.
What was that Twitter discourse though that was like, you said like, if you date a guy who eats dessert, like, we're not.
Why would you as a man know your own birth chart?
That outcry is just so gendered. Like, for astrology and crystals and tarot. Like, I know guys who do tarot and no one cares. Like, in fact, women always think it's super cool that they do it. I was thinking back to like, I'm gonna say the English name for it, like Hammer of Witches, which was written by Catholic clergymen in the 1400s. But in the book it basically says like, you have to like torture witches, and then the only way to destroy them is to kill them through murder and burn them alive, and all these like very intense torturous ways for witches. But there's nothing in the book about men doing magic. And like, the way that when they said there were witches in the town, no one even remotely considered the man in the woods who hate everybody.
You know who was a magician? Jesus.
Mila.
I don't know how it's gonna be like. Us might be calling Jesus a magician as a take.
But the way that they didn't consider Solomon, and he like left the settlement. He's the least attached to any of them. He dislikes several people in the town, and he acts like a weirdo and only talks to Dina. And he lost his children, and no one ever suspected anything about him. And we learn in like the first half of the movie that he's the one who had contact with the widow, where they went to go get the mystical berries, and there's all this lore around her being a witch. And we learned that he did it, and no one gave a shit that he went to go see her to like try to heal his wife using witchcraft.
They didn't even suspect the actual witch in the woods. They sooner suspected the lesbians than the confirmed lady who lives in a cave.
And then when she goes back and sees the lady murdered, she did have this book, and she did tell her not to touch it. But we also I don't get the vibe that she was vibing with the book either. But the fact that he goes and kills her and takes the book is like, I have in my notes verbatim. A white man's desire for power causing the death of multiple women, and a curse that affects descendants of people from Shadyside for hundreds of years, is extremely on brand.
Story checks out.
She comes back with a severed hand, which I actually saw online in an article by Scott White, that severed hands often demonstrate a loss of humanity through criminal or monstrous actions, or the fragility of the human body, or any unsafe situation can lead to hands being severed. And once hands are severed, they can contaminate people and objects, which is like the hand being the source of the curse and everything. But she comes back with like a severed hand, so they know she had to get in a fight with someone, but like no one in the town cared. They didn't even ask for her perspective, and I thought that was very indicative of how like you can very physically see that something is wrong with people in society sometimes, or like they've been wronged, but people don't care because they know who did it. Like, I think in their mind they knew that one of the men in the town had probably cut off her hand, and because one of the men cut off her hand, they didn't care. Like, either way, they were going to kill Dina. If she told them that Solomon had a cave under the ground and did everything, they were still going to kill her. So she would have nothing to gain by that situation. And the way that she didn't tell, and she was like, I'm just going to wait for the truth to be uncovered, and I'm just going to haunt you and your family, and this curse is going to live forever through you. Rather than her even remotely try to have people hear her out, I thought was very indicative of how things typically go.
This is backtracking a little bit, but going back to that whole like white men's affront to astrology. Zeba, you were talking about how like in these films, well, in the 1666 part, the conspiracy around them being witches is tied to their like egos. And the fact that Solomon is attracted to Dina and she rejects him, and then all of these men have this kind of hysteria around, yeah, they're witches, they're fucking gay witches, let's burn them. And I feel like although I'm sure there is an element of that with like modern dating in terms of what men think of astrology and women who really like astrology, it's definitely more like they use rationality and like science as a way of to like assert some kind of superiority on women. It's not like, oh, you have an opinion different to mine. My opinion is different. It's like, mine is the one that's stripped of any kind of emotion and subjectivity. Mine is just the way of being and the fact, and yours is this weird like,
yeah,
oh, you believe in that? That's insane.
It's like, goes back to like Enlightenment era times where it's like, I'm not going to respect what you believe in if it can't be seen empirically and studied and categorized. It's like, well, then it must not be valid if you can't prove it, like, physically and tangibly.
There's an article about this that talks about how, called, Believe the Teenage Girl, about how, teenage girls often predict trends before they become a trend, that people discredit it until, men pick up on it, how teenage girls like the Beatles and all those rock and roll bands before they amass giant followings of men, but now the people who control the narrative are adult men who are do you name 5 songs by the Beatles or take off that shirt.
We need to mention the accents. What the fuck?
They were...
I feel like they should have just not did the accents altogether.
They should have been American.
My thing was more the costume design looked comical. It really just looked like they kind of threw stuff together. And it kind of sucked because the rest of the film, I think they did great 90s outfits. I would wear what Kate was wearing. They had cute clothes. It was nice. But 1666 looked like they literally just took an apron from the kitchen and said throw on a skirt and kind of a blouse and
rub some dirt on their face.
And you're a pilgrim.
Also the hairstyles, people having their hair down, no type of bonnet. I was confused.
Having their hair down. I was like, there's no way that you in this hot sun working all day have a strand of hair in your face. That's ridiculous. I was so mad. I'm like, it's not sexy. It's not cute. It's not historically accurate. The accents were a strong choice. I don't understand.
It was literally the worst thing they could have done. Everyone had a different variation of the Irish accent. It was the most confusing, disorientating effect.
It made me a bit confused as to why the time jump was so why the middle one was in the 70s, because it's it was so jarring. It was so jarring. I'm I didn't need to be even in this. I feel like it would have been different if it was the 20s. Mm-hmm. You know, it could have, then at least I know, okay, we have a different sort of speech pattern, dialect for every film. But to jump all the way to 1666 and then to have the accents, I'm like, whoa.
I felt 94 and 78 were too close together. Not even the fashion changed enough.
I thought it was, again, kind of a good nod to issues, discourse happening now. Being when older Ziggy called, she says she called the cop because she thought they were in danger, and it's just kind of indicative of white women will call the cops because they believe that they'll still protect us.
Granted, she had sort of a romantic relationship with him.
Yeah, I did think the metaphor works more broadly. Also, when the other cops show up at the mall in the final showdown, they are it kind of tackles that thing of no such thing as a good cop, because it's it doesn't really matter who they are, why they're there. They actually don't know why they're there, which they don't know what they're working for, but they still die nonetheless because they are obviously working for the wrong side. They're working for good, who's corrupt.
I think that this film works really well with the teen horror episode that we did, because the adults are all useless in this movie. And the way that we don't see anyone's parents except for Sam's, and even when they do the ultimate flashback to 1666, their parents literally are yeah, you're gonna get hung tomorrow. I also have a note written where I said, are women in horror films actually Are there any true examples of monstrous women in horror, or are they framed that way by men who use them to cover their crimes or as sacrifices? For example, Jennifer's Body's Teeth, Rosemary's Baby, and the Fear Street Trilogy.
Isn't that kind of what the monstrous feminine is?
Yeah, it's like coded. But also going back to your teen horror thing, they also have Alice, who is like who has self-harm, and we've talked about like self-harm being prevalent in teen horror.
I feel like I have not seen a good representation of self-harm in anything ever, because I feel like they always like show it and then like completely forget. And like that's an extremely triggering topic as well. And so I'm like, I feel like you might want to spend like a little bit more time on that. She doesn't get to talk to Alice about what is causing her to self-harm. It's just like they're on this adventure and she's like, oh, and I also self-harm.
Either unpack it or don't show it.
Also, in addition to that, I think it's worth noting that Sam is the only person who can get out. Sam is like a white girl who, I mean, there's nothing that sticks out about her. And she has like nothing stigmatizing her other than like her sexuality that she at times represses, and we don't see her accept it into the end. She's able to move between these worlds seamlessly. And I think that's something that people should probably think about, because I feel like sometimes because the way that patriarchy works, it makes people very unaware of how systems of oppression stack onto each other, and also how like being a woman does not necessarily exclude you from benefiting from white supremacy, or being a queer woman if you're white.
Or class.
Yeah, class.
And that is why Sam is the one who can move out of Shady Side and be accepted by her peers, and the only thing that she had to do was date a frat boy. So I think that definitely shows how being a white woman makes it very easy to benefit from white supremacy. And
I think what you said about like the sort of heterosexual privilege, or the appearing heterosexual privilege when she couples up with Peter in Sunnyvale, is what kind of maybe slips under the radar. I didn't think about the curse really, but I guess you could look at like if there's prevailing oppressive structures, how that works to create stigma in between across oppressed groups for certain other things. But I did think from more Dina's perspective, looking at Sam with her boyfriend, it did seem a little like potentially biphobic, just in the sense that I feel like in a lot of like queer storylines, it's like when she gets with a man, it means she's repressing her sexuality, and that's what pisses off
like betraying them.
Yeah, betraying. And I was just like, okay. I mean, I think in this instance it could also just be Dina being super jealous, but I think maybe going forward there should be a little bit more care in that kind of narrative to either say that she is actually just a lesbian, or maybe she is bisexual but she's still not being all honest with her feelings. You know what I mean? Not that we have to have a label. I just mean that sometimes the implications could be problematic if it's not explained a little bit.
And I also feel like this movie is a great example of systems of oppression cannot be reformed, they have to be destroyed. How do you reform a curse that is enacted to make a white family rich forever and benefit all the white people in this town? That can't be reformed, it has to be destroyed. And that's the same way that systems of oppression work in society today. They can't be reformed. You can't reform things that were set up to hurt people from a certain background, race, sexuality. They have to be destroyed.
It is somewhat disappointing that I think the commentary that they made, or the implication that they made about like race and policing, is there enough to the point where it makes a better commentary than like the direction that horror noir made by Black people is going right now. After Get Out, everyone thinks that we need to make race a category of horror, and I think that ironically I'd prefer something like this, where it's like you still have an oogie boogie horror element as canonical in the genre, but race is explored. And I thought it was kind of disappointing that horror noir now is kind of going the route of like trauma porn and stuff, like with them and everything. And journalist Jason Okundaye for The Guardian was like kind of writing on this topic as well, if you wanted to read more in depth about that, about whether horror is a good space for the horror as a genre is a good space for exploring racial issues and how to do it. And ironically, this film is like kind of more of how to do it for me than some of those other ones that are coming out. The article was a review of them that just came out. So yeah, and it's quite interesting. So I think, like, although race is sidelined as an issue, I'm kind of grateful for it because of the production team, and who's writing it and who's working on it. And also, still, it's poignant enough and better than some of the other commentaries I've seen that try to intersect horror and race. Okonde quotes another author, Brandon Taylor, who I think eloquently breaks down why, if it's happening in real life and it's still happening in real life, horror might not be the genre for it. And I think he says something like, if horror is about unconscious Freudian fears, then, and I quote, how can the specter of racism and racial violence be reduced to the arena of fear, quote, when it persists as a force for violence and social death against Black audiences who are watching? And he goes on to say, the imagination cannot make space for racism as an unrealized fear through the horror genre when these acts of violence are realized daily. And it's kind of like, basically, if horror is kind of dealing with unconscious, like coded, like we're kind of talking about monstrous feminine presences, it's very jarring to see it be overt racist violence, as if it's presenting that as an unconscious fear, when it's like, no, it's very conscious, it's very here, like, you know, it's very much happening. Bringing it back to this film, I'm just happy that they didn't do it so on the nose, basically.
Yeah.
I think it's more powerful not done on the nose.
This is a good trilogy, although they could have really did better for the 1666 sequence. But I really liked it. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to The Monstrous Feminine. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, SoundCloud, and Spotify at The Monstrous Feminine Podcast, and on Twitter at The MonFemPod. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts to be our next Witch of the Week. We also have a TikTok. Follow us at The Monstrous Feminine Pod for podcast clips and more fun. Brooms up, witches out.